On a crisp autumn morning, a bright-eyed 12-year-old girl clutched her boarding pass, excitement bubbling in her chest. This was her first time flying alone to visit her grandmother in Atlanta. Her mother had carefully prepared her for the journey, making sure she knew all the proper travel procedures and had packed her favorite blue backpack with everything she needed. The young traveler had arrived at the airport 3 hours early, just as her parents had taught her. She went through security without any issues, politely answering questions and following instructions. Several TSA agents even commented on how well-behaved and mature she was for her age. While waiting at the gate, she struck up a conversation with an elderly couple who were also traveling to Atlanta to visit their grandchildren. They shared stories about their families and showed each other pictures on their phones. The girl proudly displayed photos of the science fair project that had won her first place at school, a detailed model of the solar system that she had worked on for weeks. When boarding time arrived, she lined up with the other passengers, carefully holding her boarding pass and student ID. She was in Group 2, and she waited patiently for her turn, remembering everything her parents had taught her about airplane etiquette. As she approached the gate agent, she smiled and handed over her documents. The agent processed them without issue and wished her a pleasant flight. Walking down the jet bridge, she felt like a grown-up, managing her first solo travel experience with confidence. The problems began when she reached the aircraft door. The flight attendant at the entrance gave her an unusual look and asked to see her boarding pass again, despite it already being checked at the gate. The young girl handed it over without complaint, but noticed that other passengers weren't being asked for this double verification. She found her assigned seat, 14C, an aisle seat, and settled in, placing her backpack under the seat in front of her as required. She even helped the elderly passenger next to her store a small bag in the overhead compartment, earning a warm smile and a grateful "thank you." Everything seemed fine until a different flight attendant approached her seat. This attendant, with perfectly styled hair and a stern expression, stood over her and demanded to see her boarding pass yet again. The young girl's hands trembled slightly as she retrieved it from her pocket, feeling the eyes of nearby passengers on her. The flight attendant scrutinized the boarding pass for an unusually long time, then asked, "Are you sure you're supposed to be on this flight?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. The girl's voice remained steady as she replied, "Yes, ma'am. I'm traveling to visit my grandmother." The gate agent checked my documents twice. But the flight attendant wasn't satisfied. She began questioning the girl about her travel arrangements, her destination, and why she was flying alone. The girl answered each question clearly and politely, just as her parents had taught her. She explained about her grandmother waiting in Atlanta, showed her unaccompanied minor documentation, and even offered to call her parents for verification. Several passengers around her began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. The elderly couple from the gate, who had coincidentally been seated a few rows behind, tried to intervene, explaining that they had been talking with her earlier and that she was clearly a responsible young traveler. Despite this support, the flight attendant's demeanor grew increasingly hostile. She called over the lead flight attendant and began a hushed conversation, occasionally glancing back at the young girl. The girl sat perfectly still, her heart pounding, trying to understand what she had done wrong. The lead flight attendant approached her seat and said, "We're going to need you to come with us." When the girl asked why, the response was vague, something about protocol and security concerns. By this point, other passengers were openly watching the situation unfold, many with concerned expressions. The elderly woman sitting next to her spoke up, "This child has done absolutely nothing wrong. She's been nothing but polite and well-behaved. What exactly is the problem here?" Several other passengers murmured in agreement, but the flight attendants remained unmoved. With tears threatening to spill from her eyes, the young girl gathered her belongings and followed the flight attendants off the plane. As she walked down the aisle, she held her head high, despite the humiliation burning in her chest. She could hear passengers behind her expressing their disapproval of the situation. Back in the terminal, the girl was met by airport security and gate agents who seemed confused about why she had been removed from the flight. Her hands shaking, she called her mother, who had thankfully not left the airport parking lot yet. Within minutes, her mother arrived at the gate, her face a mixture of concern and barely contained anger. The girl ran into her mother's arms, finally letting her tears fall. Her mother, a successful corporate attorney, immediately began asking questions and documenting everything that had happened. The gate agents, now fully aware of the situation, were apologetic and immediately began working to rebook them on the next flight to Atlanta. But the girl's mother wasn't interested in a quick fix. She took out her phone and began recording, asking each airline employee to explain exactly why her daughter had been removed from the flight. The answers were vague and contradictory. Some mentioned security protocols, others claimed there was confusion about documentation, but none could provide a specific, valid reason for removing a properly ticketed, well-behaved child from the airplane. As other passengers from the flight began deplaning, the flight had been delayed so long it needed to be cancelled. Many stopped to offer their support and contact information, volunteering to be witnesses to what they had observed. The elderly couple was particularly vocal, describing how the girl had helped others and conducted herself with perfect manners throughout the entire ordeal. The girl's mother, maintaining her professional composure, informed the airline staff that this incident would not be ignored. She worked with the gate agents to ensure her daughter would be on the next flight to Atlanta, but this time, she would be accompanying her. As they waited for their new flight, the mother began making calls, to the airline's corporate office, to her law firm, and to several journalists she had worked with over the years. The story was far from over, but as the young girl sat in the airport terminal with her mother's protective arm around her shoulders, she made a decision. This experience, as painful as it was, would not break her spirit. Instead, it would become the catalyst for something much bigger, a movement that would force people to confront their biases and make real changes in how they treat others. Little did the flight attendants know that their actions that day would not only lead to significant consequences for themselves and their airline but would also inspire a nationwide conversation about discrimination and prejudice in everyday situations. The young girl's story was about to become a powerful testament to standing up against injustice, and her response would indeed leave people speechless, but not for the reasons they might expect. The following morning, the girl's mother had already set wheels in motion that would shake the airline industry to its core. She wasn't just any corporate attorney, she specialized in civil rights cases and had built a reputation for turning individual incidents into catalysts for systemic change. As they sat in their Atlanta hotel room, their original plans to stay with grandmother had been delayed. The mother-daughter duo began documenting everything while it was still fresh in their minds. The young girl, still wearing her favorite space-themed hoodie, spoke clearly into her mother's phone, recording a detailed account of the previous day's events. "I kept thinking about what you always tell me," she said to her mother, her voice growing stronger with each word. "About how staying calm in difficult situations shows more strength than losing your temper. Even when I wanted to cry, I remembered that." Her mother smiled proudly, though her eyes glistened with tears. Meanwhile, social media was already buzzing. Several passengers from the flight had posted about the incident, and their posts were gaining traction. One video, recorded by a passenger showing the girl helping others with their bags before being removed, had already garnered over 100,000 views overnight. The elderly couple from the flight, who turned out to be retired educators, had written a detailed Facebook post about their interaction with the girl at the gate and their observations of the incident. Their post was being shared rapidly across multiple platforms, with many people expressing outrage at the airline's actions. By mid-morning, several news outlets had picked up the story. The girl's mother, strategic as ever, chose to give an exclusive interview to a respected journalist known for her fair and thorough coverage of civil rights issues. However, she made sure her daughter wouldn't be overwhelmed by the media attention, protecting her privacy while still allowing her voice to be heard. The airline's initial response was a textbook example of corporate damage control, a generic statement about taking all incidents seriously and investigating the matter. But this wouldn't be enough, not this time. The girl's mother had already compiled a comprehensive report, including statements from witnesses, timestamps of events, and copies of all relevant documentation. What made this case particularly powerful was the young girl's academic achievements and impeccable behavior throughout the incident. Her school principal had reached out, offering to provide character statements about her role as student council president and her recent selection to represent her school at a statewide science competition. The story took an unexpected turn when a flight attendant from another airline created a viral TikTok video addressing the incident. In it, she explained standard protocols for unaccompanied minors and highlighted how none of these protocols involved removing well-documented passengers from flights. Her video sparked a larger conversation within the airline industry about implicit bias training. Back in Atlanta, the girl finally made it to her grandmother's house, where she found unexpected strength in her grandmother's stories of similar struggles during the civil rights movement. Her grandmother, a retired high school chemistry teacher, shared how she had faced discrimination in her own career but had used education and dignity as her weapons of choice. "You know what we're going to do?" her grandmother said, pulling out a worn notebook. "We're going to turn this into a learning opportunity." Together, they began drafting ideas for a children's book about traveling while different, incorporating real tips and empowering messages for young readers. The airline's response continued to evolve as pressure mounted. Internal emails leaked showing that several employees had questioned the flight attendant's decisions during the incident. The airline's own policies, when examined, revealed no justification for the treatment the young girl had received. A week after the incident, the airline's CEO requested a meeting with the family. The young girl's mother agreed, but on one condition: her daughter would be allowed to speak first, sharing her experience in her own words. The CEO accepted. During the meeting, the young girl surprised everyone with her poise and clarity. She didn't just talk about her experience, she came prepared with a PowerPoint presentation titled, "Making Air Travel Fair for Everyone." She had researched statistics on discriminatory incidents in air travel and included suggestions for improvement, from enhanced training programs to clearer protocols for handling passenger concerns. The CEO, visibly moved by her presentation, took unprecedented action. Instead of the usual corporate approach of quiet settlements and non-disclosure agreements, he agreed to work with the family to implement real changes. The young girl's suggestions would become the foundation for a new training program, and she would be invited to speak at the airline's annual employee conference. But perhaps the most significant development came from an unexpected source. Other young travelers began sharing their own stories on social media using a hashtag inspired by the incident. What had started as one girl's traumatic experience was evolving into a movement for change in the airline industry. The girl's mother ensured that the momentum would lead to lasting impact. She worked with civil rights organizations to develop a passenger bill of rights specifically addressing discrimination in air travel. The document would later be known informally as the Young Traveler's Charter. Through it all, the young girl maintained her dignity and determination. She returned to school a different person, not broken by the experience, but empowered by the knowledge that her voice could make a difference. Her science teacher noted that she had begun incorporating social justice themes into her projects, recently designing an experiment to study decision-making bias. As the story gained national attention, letters and messages of support poured in from around the country. Many shared similar experiences, but what stood out was how the young girl's response, calm, dignified, and solution-focused, had inspired others to address discrimination constructively. The incident that was meant to humiliate and disempower had instead sparked a nationwide conversation about how we treat young travelers, particularly those from minority communities. The flight attendant's attempt to remove one girl from a plane had inadvertently launched her into a position of advocacy she had never imagined for herself. 3 weeks after the incident, the young girl stood before a packed auditorium at her school's assembly. The principal had invited her to share her experience, not just as a cautionary tale, but as a lesson in turning adversity into opportunity. She adjusted the microphone, took a deep breath, and began speaking. Unlike many who face discrimination, she had the rare opportunity to see real change emerge from her experience. The airline's CEO had kept his word, and the changes being implemented were far more extensive than anyone had expected. Training programs were being overhauled, and new guidelines were being written with input from civil rights experts. But what made her story particularly powerful was how it had sparked a broader movement. Students from across the country had started sharing their own experiences of facing prejudice while traveling, shopping, or simply existing in public spaces. Their stories weren't just complaints, they were calls to action, each accompanied by suggestions for positive change. The young girl's grandmother had been right about turning the experience into a teaching moment. Together, they had completed their children's book, Flying While Different, which was now being reviewed by several publishing houses. The story, told through the eyes of a young traveler, didn't focus on blame or anger but instead emphasized empowerment and solution building. Back at the airline, changes were happening at an unprecedented pace. The 2 flight attendants involved in the incident had been required to undergo extensive retraining. More significantly, they had requested a meeting with the young girl and her mother to apologize in person. The meeting, which took place in a neutral setting with mediators present, became another unexpected learning opportunity. The lead flight attendant, fighting back tears, explained how the incident had forced her to confront her own biases. "I've been flying for 15 years, she admitted, and I never once stopped to question why I felt suspicious in certain situations. Your dignity in handling this situation made me realize I was the one who needed to change." The airline's new training program, partially designed with input from the young girl and her mother, was already showing promising results. It included real-world scenarios and required employees to examine their decision-making processes. The program emphasized that security concerns should be based on observable behaviors, not appearances or assumptions. What made this case different from similar incidents was its focus on solutions rather than punishment. The young girl's mother, drawing on her legal experience, had pushed for systemic changes instead of just monetary compensation. The resulting reforms were being studied by other airlines as a model for industry-wide improvements. The story took another surprising turn when the elderly couple from the original flight reached out with an interesting proposal. They were part of a National Educators Association and wanted to develop a curriculum around the incident. The program would teach students about civil rights, peaceful resistance, and constructive responses to discrimination. The young girl's science fair project that year reflected her evolving interests. She designed a study examining how stress affects decision-making, inspired by her observation that the flight attendants seemed to make poorer choices as the situation escalated. Her project won not only first place but also a special award for social impact. Social media continued to amplify the story's impact. A popular content creator had interviewed the young girl for their channel, focusing on her innovative approach to addressing discrimination. The video, which showed her explaining her PowerPoint presentation to the airline CEO, went viral, inspiring other young people to create similar proposals for their schools and communities. The airline's employee conference, where the young girl was invited to speak, proved to be a turning point. Instead of dwelling on the negative aspects of her experience, she focused on the opportunity for growth. She shared her vision for an airline industry where every passenger felt welcome and respected, regardless of their appearance or background. Her grandmother attended the conference, beaming with pride as her granddaughter addressed hundreds of airline employees. During a break, she shared stories with the attendees about her own experiences with discrimination decades ago. The contrast between past and present highlighted how far society had come, and how far it still needed to go. The impact rippled beyond the airline industry. Schools began incorporating lessons about bias and constructive responses to discrimination into their curricula. Business schools used the case as an example of how companies should handle similar incidents. Civil rights organizations cited it as a model for turning individual experiences into systemic change. Perhaps most importantly, the young girl's response to discrimination became a template for others facing similar situations. Instead of letting anger or hurt define their reactions, people began asking themselves, what would that young girl do? The answer invariably involved staying calm, documenting everything, and pushing for constructive changes. As winter turned to spring, the young girl finally took another flight to visit her grandmother, this time without incident. The same airline, under new protocols, provided exemplary service. Flight attendants recognized her from the training videos and thanked her for helping improve their industry. One even asked her to sign a copy of her PowerPoint presentation. The story might have ended there, but its impact continued to grow. Other industries began examining their own practices and protocols. Retail chains, hotels, and public transportation systems started reaching out to the young girl's mother for guidance on implementing similar training programs. 6 months after the incident, the young girl's life had transformed in ways she never expected. Her story had evolved from a single act of discrimination into a nationwide movement for positive change. Her children's book, Flying While Different, had been picked up by a major publisher and was scheduled for release in the upcoming fall. The airline industry had undergone significant changes, largely inspired by her experience. The training program she helped develop had been adopted by 3 other major airlines, and transportation industry leaders were beginning to recognize that preventing discrimination wasn't just morally right, it was good for business. One sunny morning, she received an unexpected email from a teacher in California. A class of 5th graders had studied her case and created their own presentations about making public spaces more inclusive. The students had recorded a video for her, sharing their ideas and thanking her for showing them how to stand up for themselves with grace and intelligence. Her mother's law firm had established a new division focused specifically on transportation equity cases. They worked with companies proactively, helping them identify and address potential issues before incidents could occur. The young girl often sat in on these meetings, offering her unique perspective as both a catalyst for change and a representative of the next generation. The effects rippled through her own school as well. The principal had established a student advisory committee on inclusion, with the young girl serving as its first chairperson. The committee reviewed school policies and suggested improvements, from dress code enforcement to disciplinary procedures. Their recommendations were taken seriously, leading to meaningful changes in how the school handled various situations. Her grandmother, inspired by the ongoing impact of their collaboration, had started a mentorship program for young travelers. Drawing on her years of teaching experience, she developed workshops that helped children understand their rights while teaching them how to handle difficult situations with dignity. The program quickly gained popularity, with requests coming in from community centers across the country. The elderly couple who had supported her during the incident remained in touch, becoming unexpected allies in her journey. They had successfully integrated her story into their educational association's curriculum, reaching thousands of students nationwide. The lessons focused not just on recognizing discrimination but on responding to it constructively and creating lasting change. One day, while presenting at a youth leadership conference, the young girl met another student who had faced a similar situation at a different airport. Instead of feeling helpless, this student had remembered her story and knew exactly what to do: stay calm, document everything, and focus on creating systemic change rather than seeking revenge. The airline's CEO had kept his commitment to reform. Quarterly reports showed a significant decrease in discrimination complaints across all their routes. More importantly, employee satisfaction had improved as staff felt better equipped to handle difficult situations. The airline had become an industry leader in inclusive practices, proving that doing the right thing could also be good for the bottom line. The young girl's science fair project had evolved into a more comprehensive study of decision-making under pressure. Working with a psychology professor from a local university, she designed experiments that helped identify trigger points where bias was most likely to influence choices. Their findings were being incorporated into training programs across various industries. Her social media presence had grown organically, not through sensationalism but through thoughtful content about creating positive change. She started a weekly video series where she shared stories of other young people who had turned negative experiences into opportunities for improvement. The series gained a loyal following, inspiring viewers to become advocates for change in their own communities. The flight attendants who had removed her from the plane had undergone a remarkable transformation themselves. After completing their retraining, they became vocal advocates for reform within the airline industry. They shared their story openly, admitting their mistakes and describing how the incident had forced them to confront their own biases. As summer approached, the young girl received an invitation that left her speechless. The Department of Transportation wanted her to speak at a national conference on passenger rights. They were particularly interested in her perspective on how transportation policies affected young travelers from diverse backgrounds. Her presentation at the conference marked a full-circle moment. Standing at the podium, she shared not just her story but the stories of countless others who had reached out to her over the months. She emphasized that real change required more than just new policies. It required a fundamental shift in how people viewed and treated each other. The conference organizers were so impressed that they established a youth advisory board for transportation policy, with the young girl serving as its inaugural member. The board would ensure that young voices were heard in discussions about transportation regulations and passenger rights. Looking back on the past 6 months, the young girl realized that what had started as a traumatic experience had evolved into something far more significant. She had shown that age was no barrier to creating meaningful change, and that responding to discrimination with dignity and determination could lead to lasting improvements. As the 1-year anniversary of the incident approached, the young girl found herself preparing for her biggest challenge yet. She had been invited to testify before a congressional committee on transportation equity and passenger rights. Her mother, beaming with pride, helped her prepare her testimony, ensuring every word carried the weight of their shared experience. The children's book they had created, Flying While Different, had become a surprise bestseller, finding its way into school libraries across the nation. Teachers reported using it not just as a story about discrimination, but as a guide for young people facing challenging situations of any kind. The book's central message, that dignity and determination could overcome prejudice, resonated deeply with readers of all ages. One morning, while reviewing her upcoming speaking schedule, she received an unexpected message. A major technology company had developed an artificial intelligence training program based on her experience. The program helped service industry workers recognize and overcome implicit bias in their decision-making. They wanted her input on making the training more effective for real-world situations. Her grandmother's mentorship program had expanded beyond its original scope. What started as workshops for young travelers had evolved into a comprehensive youth leadership program. Participants learned about civil rights history, public speaking, and advocacy skills. Most importantly, they learned how to transform negative experiences into opportunities for positive change. The airline industry had undergone a remarkable transformation. The training program she helped develop had become the gold standard for customer service training across multiple industries. Companies began to realize that preventing discrimination wasn't just about avoiding bad publicity, it was about creating an environment where every customer felt valued and respected. During a career day presentation at her school, she shared an observation that captured the essence of her journey. Sometimes the worst moments in our lives become the foundation for the best changes. It's not about what happens to us, it's about how we choose to respond. Her mother's law firm had successfully handled dozens of similar cases, but with a unique approach. Instead of seeking purely monetary settlements, they pushed for structural changes within organizations. Companies were required to implement comprehensive training programs, revise their policies, and establish clear accountability measures. The elderly couple who had supported her during the incident had become treasured mentors. Their educational program about responding to discrimination had been adopted by schools in all 50 states. They often invited her to speak at teachers' conferences, where she shared how educators could help students turn difficult experiences into learning opportunities. One day, while visiting the airport where the incident occurred, she noticed something remarkable. The terminal now displayed a large poster about passenger rights, featuring diverse travelers and clear information about proper procedures. At the bottom was a QR code linking to her educational resources about traveling while different. The flight attendants involved in the incident had become unexpected allies in her cause. They traveled to industry conferences, sharing their story as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked bias. Their honesty about their mistakes and commitment to change helped other aviation professionals confront their own prejudices. During a National Youth Leadership Summit, she met dozens of young people who had used her story as a template for handling discrimination in their own lives. They shared stories of staying calm in difficult situations, documenting incidents properly, and pushing for systemic changes rather than settling for quick fixes. Her science project on decision-making under pressure had caught the attention of researchers at several universities. She was invited to contribute to a study examining how stress affects judgment in service industry workers. Her insights helped develop new protocols for handling high-pressure situations without letting bias influence decisions. The Department of Transportation's Youth Advisory Board, which she helped establish, had become a powerful voice for young travelers. They reviewed policies, suggested improvements, and ensured that the perspectives of young people were considered in transportation regulations. Their recommendations led to several significant policy changes, including clearer guidelines for handling unaccompanied minors. As her influence grew, she remained focused on her original goal, making travel safer and more equitable for everyone. She worked with airports to create child-friendly information kiosks where young travelers could learn about their rights and get help if needed. The kiosks included emergency contact information and clear instructions for reporting incidents. The social media movement she inspired had evolved into a formal organization, Young Travelers for Change. The group provided resources, support, and advocacy for young people facing discrimination while traveling. They maintained a database of incidents, helped connect victims with legal resources, and worked with companies to improve their practices. Looking ahead to the congressional hearing, she felt a mixture of nervousness and determination. Her testimony would focus not just on what had happened to her, but on the thousands of similar stories she had collected over the past year. She planned to propose specific legislative changes to protect vulnerable travelers and ensure accountability for discriminatory practices. The congressional hearing marked a pivotal moment in the young girl's journey. As she sat before the committee, her voice clear and confident, she shared not just her story, but the collective experiences of thousands who had reached out to her over the past year. The chamber fell silent as she presented data, testimonials, and concrete recommendations for legislative change. This isn't just about one incident on one flight, she explained, her voice carrying throughout the room. It's about creating a transportation system that truly serves everyone. She presented a comprehensive proposal that included mandatory bias training, clearer reporting procedures, and stronger protections for young travelers. The committee members were particularly impressed by her preparation. She had compiled a detailed report showing patterns of discrimination across different transportation sectors, supported by statistics and first-hand accounts. One senator remarked that her presentation was more thorough than many from professional policy analysts. Back home, her school had transformed her experience into a broader learning opportunity. The civics teacher used her congressional testimony as a case study in how ordinary citizens could influence public policy. Students watched the live stream, taking notes on her presentation techniques and the way she handled challenging questions from committee members. Her grandmother sat in the front row during the hearing, tissues clutched in her hand. Afterward, she shared stories of her own appearances before government committees during the civil rights movement. But you, she told her granddaughter, you're showing them a new way forward. You're not just pointing out problems, you're offering solutions. The technology company's AI training program had evolved with her input. They had incorporated real-world scenarios based on reported incidents, helping service workers identify and correct their biases before they led to discriminatory actions. Early results showed a significant reduction in customer complaints at companies using the program. During a follow-up meeting with airline executives, she presented an unexpected proposal. She suggested creating a youth advisory council for the airline industry, comprised of young travelers from diverse backgrounds. The council would review policies, suggest improvements, and help airlines better understand the needs of young passengers. The airline industry, initially defensive about her story, had come to see her as a valuable consultant. Her insights helped them identify potential problems before they became incidents, saving them from both public relations disasters and legal challenges. Other transportation sectors began seeking her advice as well. Her mother's law firm had established a scholarship program for young people interested in transportation law and civil rights. The scholarship, named in honor of her grandmother, covered full tuition for students committed to advancing transportation equity. The first batch of recipients had already begun their law school journeys. The children's book had spawned a series, each addressing different aspects of traveling while different. The latest installment focused on helping others facing discrimination, teaching young readers how to be effective allies. Schools nationwide had incorporated the series into their character education programs. One afternoon, while reviewing letters from supporters, she received a message that brought tears to her eyes. A young traveler had successfully used the strategies from her book to handle a difficult situation at a bus station. Instead of becoming upset, the child had calmly documented the incident and worked with the company to improve their training procedures. The elderly couple's education program had expanded to include a digital platform, making their resources available to schools worldwide. They had created interactive modules based on real incidents, helping students develop practical skills for handling discrimination. The program's success led to partnerships with major education technology companies. Her social media presence had evolved into a powerful advocacy platform. Rather than focusing on negative experiences, she highlighted success stories, instances where companies had made positive changes, where individuals had handled discrimination effectively, and where communities had come together to support vulnerable travelers. The Department of Transportation had implemented many of her recommendations, creating clearer guidelines for handling young travelers and establishing stronger accountability measures for discriminatory incidents. They cited her case as a turning point in their approach to passenger rights and protection. The flight attendants who had removed her from the plane had become regular speakers at her training sessions. Their perspective helped others understand how unconscious bias could influence decision-making, and their transformation showed that change was possible when people were willing to confront their prejudices. During a national transportation conference, she introduced a new initiative, a certification program for youth-friendly transportation services. Companies could earn certification by implementing specific policies, completing required training, and demonstrating a commitment to equitable service. The program quickly gained support from major industry players. Her scientific research on decision-making under pressure had led to a breakthrough. Working with psychologists and transportation experts, she had identified key moments in customer service interactions where bias was most likely to influence choices. This insight helped companies develop better protocols for handling stressful situations. Looking back on the congressional hearing, she realized that her journey had come full circle. What began as a humiliating experience had transformed into a movement for positive change. Her testimony wasn't just about holding people accountable, it was about creating a better future for all travelers. In the months following her congressional testimony, change began happening at an unprecedented pace. The House Transportation Committee had drafted new legislation, nicknamed the Young Travelers Protection Act, incorporating many of her recommendations. The bill promised stronger safeguards for vulnerable passengers and clearer accountability measures for transportation providers. Her latest speaking tour took an unexpected turn when she visited a small regional airport in the Midwest. The airport manager shared how they had completely redesigned their training programs after hearing her story. They now had dedicated youth ambassadors at every terminal, specially trained staff members who helped young travelers navigate the airport safely and confidently. The impact of her advocacy reached beyond American borders. International airlines began adopting her training programs, translating her materials into multiple languages. A major European carrier invited her to help develop their new passenger rights initiative, recognizing that discrimination in travel was a global issue that required global solutions. Her grandmother's mentorship program had evolved into an international network. Young people from different countries shared their experiences and strategies for handling discrimination while traveling. The network organized virtual meetings where participants could learn from each other and develop new approaches to creating change in their communities. During a workshop at a national education conference, she introduced a new component to her program, teaching young people how to use data to support their advocacy work. She shared how collecting and analyzing incident reports had strengthened her arguments before Congress and helped convince companies to change their policies. The AI training program she had helped develop showed remarkable results. Companies using the system reported a 70% reduction in discrimination-related complaints. The technology company had created a scholarship in her name, supporting young people interested in using artificial intelligence to promote social justice. Her mother's law firm had established a pro bono division dedicated to helping young travelers facing discrimination. They offered free legal advice through a user-friendly app, helping people understand their rights and document incidents properly. The app had been downloaded over 1 million times, becoming a vital resource for travelers worldwide. The children's book series had expanded to include interactive digital content. Young readers could now explore scenarios virtually, practicing how to respond to different situations. Schools reported that students who engaged with the content showed increased empathy and better problem-solving skills when facing real-world challenges. One morning, while reviewing her schedule, she received exciting news. A major theme park company wanted to implement her youth-friendly certification program across all their properties. They saw it as a way to ensure every young visitor felt safe and respected, regardless of their background. The flight attendants who had been involved in her incident had started their own consulting firm, helping transportation companies identify and address potential bias in their operations. They often referenced their experience as a turning point, showing how confronting one's mistakes could lead to positive change. During a youth leadership summit, she met a group of students who had created a mobile app based on her advocacy work. The app helped young travelers connect with each other at airports, creating informal support networks. With proper safety measures in place, it had become a popular tool for making travel less intimidating for young people. Her research on decision-making under pressure had attracted attention from behavioral scientists. They discovered that her insights about bias in high-stress situations applied to many different fields, from healthcare to education. Several universities had incorporated her findings into their professional training programs. The Department of Transportation's Youth Advisory Board had grown into a powerful voice for change. They regularly reviewed proposed regulations, ensuring that young travelers' perspectives were considered in policy decisions. Their recommendations had led to significant improvements in how transportation systems served young passengers. Her social media presence had evolved into a global movement. Young people worldwide shared stories of using her strategies to handle difficult situations. Each success story reinforced her central message, that responding to discrimination with dignity and determination could create lasting change. The elderly couple who had supported her during the incident had retired from teaching but remained active in advocacy work. They had created an online resource center, helping educators integrate lessons about discrimination and civil rights into their curricula. Their materials were being used in schools across the country. During a visit to her old airport gate, where the incident had occurred, she noticed something remarkable. The space had been transformed into a welcoming area for young travelers, with clear information about passenger rights displayed prominently. A plaque on the wall commemorated her story, serving as a reminder of how one incident could spark meaningful change. Looking ahead, she saw countless opportunities for continued progress. The Young Travelers Protection Act was moving through Congress, companies were embracing youth-friendly certification, and new technologies were making it easier to prevent and report discrimination. 2 years after that fateful flight, the young girl stood in front of the newly inaugurated Center for Transportation Equity. The modern building, located just outside Washington, D.C., represented the culmination of her journey. Inside, teams of researchers, advocates, and industry experts worked together to ensure safe and equitable travel for everyone. The Young Travelers Protection Act had passed with bipartisan support, establishing new standards for how transportation providers treated young passengers. Companies were required to maintain detailed records of incidents, provide comprehensive bias training, and establish clear procedures for handling complaints. The law was already being hailed as a model for similar legislation in other countries. On this particular morning, she was preparing to welcome the first class of youth ambassadors. The program, funded by a coalition of transportation companies, would train young people to become advocates for traveler rights in their communities. The ambassadors represented diverse backgrounds and experiences, each bringing unique perspectives to the cause. Her grandmother, now running leadership workshops at the center, often reminded visitors that the most powerful changes often started with the most difficult moments. "My granddaughter didn't just overcome discrimination," she would say, "she transformed it into an opportunity for everyone to do better." The airline industry had undergone a complete cultural shift. The training program she developed had become standard practice, with regular updates based on new research and real-world experiences. Airlines competed to achieve the highest ratings in youth-friendly service, recognizing that treating young travelers with respect was good for business. During a recent international transportation conference, she presented surprising data. Incidents of discrimination against young travelers had decreased by 60% across participating companies. The reduction wasn't just due to better policies, it reflected a fundamental change in how transportation workers approached their interactions with young passengers. Her mother's law firm had evolved into a global advocacy organization, with offices in major cities worldwide. They focused on preventing discrimination through education and policy reform, while still providing legal support when needed. Their app had become an essential travel tool, helping people document incidents and connect with resources. The children's book series had expanded to include titles in multiple languages, reaching young readers around the world. Schools used the books to teach important lessons about civil rights, advocacy, and problem-solving. The latest installment focused on how young people could work together to create positive change in their communities. The technology company's AI training program had become increasingly sophisticated, learning from thousands of real-world scenarios to help identify potential bias before it led to discriminatory actions. The system was now being adapted for use in other industries, from healthcare to retail. One afternoon, while reviewing applications for the center's scholarship program, she received news that brought tears to her eyes. The flight attendants who had removed her from the plane had been honored with an industry award for their work in bias prevention. Their journey from that difficult day to becoming champions of change inspired others to confront their own biases. The elderly couple's educational resources had become part of standard teacher training programs nationwide. Their approach to teaching about discrimination and civil rights, influenced by her story, helped educators prepare students to handle difficult situations with confidence and dignity. During a recent visit to her old school, she met with students who had started their own advocacy projects inspired by her example. One group had created a peer support network for students facing discrimination, while another worked with local businesses to implement youth-friendly policies. The Department of Transportation's Youth Advisory Board had expanded its scope, now including young representatives from various transportation sectors. Their input helped shape policies affecting everything from airline procedures to public transit systems. Companies learned to value young perspectives in their decision-making processes. Her research on decision-making under pressure had led to breakthrough insights in behavioral psychology. Scientists discovered that understanding how bias operated in transportation settings could help address discrimination in many other areas of life. Universities incorporated these findings into their professional training programs. The social media movement she inspired had evolved into a global network of young advocates. They shared resources, supported each other's initiatives, and celebrated successes together. The hashtag she created years ago still trended regularly, now associated with positive changes rather than negative experiences. Looking out over the center's main hall, filled with visitors exploring interactive exhibits about transportation equity, she reflected on how far they had come. The incident that could have left her feeling powerless had instead revealed her strength. More importantly, it had shown how one person's response to injustice could inspire others to create lasting change. As she prepared to address the new youth ambassadors, she thought about the message she wanted to share. It wasn't just about handling discrimination or standing up for your rights. It was about believing in the possibility of positive change, even in the most difficult moments. It was about transforming negative experiences into opportunities to make the world better for others. The Center for Transportation Equity stood as a testament to what could happen when people chose to respond to discrimination with determination and dignity rather than despair. It represented countless hours of work by dedicated individuals who believed in the possibility of creating a more equitable world. What had started as one girl's traumatic experience on a flight had grown into a movement that transformed how society approached issues of discrimination and equity. Her story reminded people that real change was possible when they worked together with purpose and persistence.